The signal came through like a ripple in the vast, unbroken silence of space. For the past 50 years, it had been thought to be nothing more than a ghost story, a whispered legend among the Federation's deep space officers. The Centurion, Earth's premier exploration ship, vanished into the expanse without a trace, swallowed by the unpredictable forces of space. No wreckage, no debris, just gone. That was until today. The beacon flared to life, weak but unmistakable, its frequency pinging across Federation networks like an unanswered prayer. In the command center of Federation Fleet's Deep Space Division, a crackling voice interrupted the monotony of routine. "Sir, we have a signal." Lieutenant Tessa Coulson's voice trembled, her hands flying over the console with a speed that betrayed her disbelief. "It's from the Centurion." Commander Dran Voss sat at the front of the room, arms crossed, staring at the flickering screens before him. His face was the sharp edge of years in deep space, weathered but hardened by endless days of isolation. The Centurion, lost for half a century, was a wound in the collective memory of the Federation. Now somehow it was back. He leaned forward, his gaze narrowing. "Check the frequency," he ordered, his voice low but steady, cutting through the rising tension. "On it," Coulson said, her fingers flying over the console. The data shifted rapidly on the display as she attempted to lock the signal down. "Impossible," Dran muttered under his breath, his eyes never leaving the screen. The expanse. No ship could survive out there. Not for that long. "Are you telling me this is a joke, Commander?" Coulson's voice was laced with disbelief, but she couldn't hide the curiosity creeping in. "Get me a full analysis," Dran snapped, his tone sharper now. He couldn't let the emotion of the moment cloud his judgment. "We've wasted enough time." The Centurion had been lost during a mission to explore anomalies beyond the galactic frontier, an area known for its strange and inexplicable phenomena. It was a mission meant to prove humanity's dominance in the stars, a vessel with the latest technology, and it had simply disappeared. Now it was calling out from the dark, its signal taunting them. The room was quiet as Coulson's fingers danced over the controls, trying to solidify the signal. The hum of the consoles buzzed in the background, a sharp contrast to the silence of the room. As the data stabilized, Coulson's voice rose again. "It's real. The signal's intact. The Centurion is alive." A long pause hung in the air. For a moment, Dran's thoughts were still. The Centurion had been gone so long that even the very idea of it returning felt impossible. Yet the reality in front of him couldn't be ignored. It was more than a signal. It was a defiant declaration from the void. "We're going in," Dran finally said, his voice firm. "Prepare the Lancer. I want a team ready in 20 minutes. This isn't some pirate trap or malfunction. This is something else." The Lancer was already prepped and ready in record time. The team, a mix of scientists, engineers and military personnel, had assembled quickly, the usual hum of activity, replaced with a sharp edge of tension. Dran, in his standard black combat suit, adjusted his headset, his fingers tapping rhythmically against his control panel. "Commander Voss, we're clear for departure." The voice of Lieutenant Coulson came over the comms. "Proceed," Dran replied, his eyes set forward, watching as the ship's engines powered up. They broke free from the Federation command station, the stars outside stretching as the vessel slipped into the vastness of the expanse. The Lancer cut through the cold darkness, its sleek frame moving in calculated precision as they headed toward the source of the signal. The distant glow of the Centurion was their only beacon, a tiny speck in the black void. Dran's mind was occupied with 1,000 thoughts, but he focused on the mission. There would be no room for mistakes. Hours later, they neared the Centurion. The strange energy signatures that had first caught their attention now loomed large, visible on their scanners, erratic bursts of power, fluctuating at regular intervals, like a heartbeat. "Reading steady," Commander Coulson reported. "Whatever it is, it's still there, and still fully intact." "Understood. Let's see it for ourselves," Dran said, his jaw tight. The Lancer slid alongside the Centurion, its lights illuminating the darkened hull. The ship was unlike anything Dran had ever seen. Its massive, worn exterior looked untouched by time, as though it had been sealed in a temporal bubble. But what struck him was the anomaly around it, the ripples in space-time, distorting their instruments as they neared. It was as though the Centurion was not just a ship, it was a rift, something that shouldn't exist, and yet here it was in front of him. "Prep for docking," Dran ordered. Coulson, Secure a route into the core. I want full scans before we board. The team went into action, and the ship began to dock. The low thrumming of the Lancer's engines filled the cabin. As the magnetic clamps engaged with the Centurion's hull, Dran stood motionless, watching the enormous ship, an unsettling sense of foreboding gnawing at his gut. As the final locks engaged, the docking bay doors of the Centurion slid open, revealing the ship's eerie interior. The light from their ship shone down the cold metal corridors, but nothing moved, no sounds, no life. The only thing that could be heard was the sound of their breathing. Dran stepped forward first, his boots clanking on the metal floor. The rest of the crew followed, their movements tense, their eyes wide as they took in the sight of the abandoned vessel. Every corner felt alive with an energy they couldn't explain. "Keep your comms open," Dran instructed. "Don't touch anything unless you have to." The silence in the ship was unsettling, as though it was holding its breath. Each step they took echoed louder than the last, amplifying the sense of unease growing inside. As they continued down the hallway, they reached a door that was slightly ajar, leading into the heart of the Centurion. This was it, the point of no return. "Let's move," Dran said. He stepped through the door, and the world around him seemed to shift. The temperature dropped. The air felt dense, thicker somehow. The core was close. And then he saw it, the pulsating heart of the ship. It was like nothing he had ever seen. Dark, glowing and shifting, as if it were alive. The hum that emanated from it was unlike any engine noise he had ever heard. It seemed to vibrate in his chest, reverberating through the air, making his skin prickle with both fear and awe. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the strange surface of the core. The world around him seemed to freeze. Time bent, his vision blurred. A voice, no, a thought whispered in his mind, not with words but with images, a vision of a future, distant and cold, a warning, the apocalypse, and humanity's potential to reshape the stars. "Get away from it," Coulson shouted from behind him, pulling him back from the core, but it was too late. Dran's body was pulsing with the core's energy. The Centurion had just revealed to him the truth of its power, and of humanity's future. He was no longer the man who had boarded this ship. Something within him had changed. "Something's wrong," Dran murmured, eyes wide. "We're not just here to observe. We're here to become something else." As the vision faded and reality snapped back into place, Dran understood. The Centurion was no ordinary ship. It wasn't a tool or a weapon. It was a catalyst. The core had chosen him, and humanity had no idea what it was about to unleash. The moment the Lancer docked with the Centurion, the silence seemed to deepen. No lights flickered to life. No clamor of machinery came to greet them. Only the cold, suffocating quiet of an abandoned ship filled the hull. Dranvos stood at the entrance, the air thick with anticipation. A dull pressure tugged at his chest, not from the vacuum of space, but from something intangible, an unseen force that made his pulse quicken. "All clear, Commander." Lieutenant Coulson's voice broke through the stillness, the edge of uncertainty in her tone unmistakable. Her hand hovered over the hatch controls, a momentary hesitation before she pressed the button. The heavy doors slid open with an almost imperceptible groan, revealing the inside of the Centurion. The light from the Lancer illuminated the entryway, casting long shadows against the metal walls. The ship's interior was pristine, but there was no life here, no crew, no sounds of equipment. It was as if the entire vessel had been paused in time. The lights overhead, faintly flickering, stretched long over the cold, flawless surfaces. Each step Dran took echoed in the expansive, sterile corridor. "Stay sharp," Dran ordered quietly, his voice low but steady. The team moved in close, rifles in hand, eyes scanning every corner, every inch of the eerily silent hall. The air tasted stale, as if the ship had been trapped in a vacuum for years, the life within it suspended in some kind of limbo. They advanced slowly, moving deeper into the ship's heart. The deeper they went, the heavier the silence grew, pressing against them. There was something unnerving about the stillness. It wasn't just that the ship had been abandoned, but that it seemed waiting, as if it knew they were coming. Their footsteps led them to a large chamber. Dran paused at the entrance, his sharp eyes sweeping over the room. What he saw stole the breath from his lungs. The crew, they were still alive, but they were frozen, suspended in time, their bodies locked in an eerie stasis. Their eyes were wide open, staring into nothing, yet not a single one of them had aged. Their uniforms remained perfectly intact, their faces calm yet devoid of expression. Some stood frozen mid-motion, hands outstretched, while others were seated at their stations, frozen in an eternal moment. "Jesus," whispered Sergeant Kieran, his voice barely audible as he stepped forward, scanning the suspended figures. "They're all still here, alive. But not," Dran finished, his words trailing off. He took a step closer, his gaze fixed on the lifeless faces. "What happened here?" Lieutenant Coulson checked her screen, tapping the console. "No signs of struggle, no breaches in the hull. Their life signs are strange. It's like they're alive, but they're not." The weight of the situation settled over Dran like a heavy club. The crew should have been dead by now. Their bodies decayed, but here they were, frozen in time, as if caught in a moment that had no beginning or end. It defied all logic. He stepped closer to one of the frozen officers, his fingers grazing the edge of the console he had been working at, when whatever happened occurred. Then, without warning, a low, thrumming sound vibrated beneath their feet. The floor hummed, and the light from the Lancer flickered. Dran's heart rate quickened. "What was that?" Coulson asked, eyes wide as she looked around, her rifle raised. Dran motioned for her to lower it. "It's coming from the core. Let's move." The deeper they ventured into the ship, the more palpable the sense of wrongness became. The ship seemed alive, pulsating with an energy that tugged at the edges of their senses. Dran could feel it in his bones. Something was watching them, waiting for them. He could almost taste the static in the air. The ship's central core was located deeper in the belly of the Centurion. It loomed before them, nestled within the dark heart of the ship, surrounded by strange alien markings, etched into the walls. Its form was unlike anything they had encountered, half organic, half mechanical. The surface shimmered, almost like liquid metal, rippling in irregular patterns, as though it were breathing. There were no clear seams, no rivets or bolts to suggest any human design. Dran felt an inexplicable pull towards the core. His breath hitched in his chest as he stepped closer, the temperature of the room growing warmer, though no heat source was visible. The walls around him seemed to stretch, their curvature bending in strange, impossible ways, making him dizzy. His hand hovered just inches from the core when suddenly a jolt. The floor beneath their feet buckled, and Dran stumbled forward, catching himself against the console beside the core. The ship shuddered again, and for a split second, Dran's vision blurred. He could hear strange whispers, voices, no thoughts filling his mind, not words, but feelings, impressions, a war, a future, humanity's potential, the weight of something far beyond their comprehension. He pulled back, gasping for air, his heart racing. The team looked at him, confusion and concern etched on their faces. He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. "Commander, you okay?" Coulson asked, her voice tense. "I'm fine," Dran managed, his voice hoarse. "But this ship isn't just alive. It's something else. It's aware." They gathered around him, hesitant to get too close. The core pulsed again, sending a ripple through the air, as if it was calling out to them. "Do you see it?" Dran asked, his voice shaky. He wasn't sure if he was speaking to his crew or to himself. The visions were becoming clearer now, fragments of an alien intelligence, a future he could not understand. The Centurion had been changed. It had absorbed something not from Earth, and that something had reshaped it. It was evolving. A sharp, sudden crack of energy sparked from the core. The lights in the room flickered violently. Dran barely had time to react as an electrical surge cascaded through the ship, lighting up their surroundings like a storm. "Get back!" Dran shouted, his voice tight with urgency. A blue arc of energy burst from the core, slamming into the walls. The air crackled with power, and the entire room seemed to pulse with the energy, as if the ship itself was alive, reacting to their presence. "Move!" Dran barked, grabbing Coulson by the arm and pulling her away. But it was too late. The surge intensified, the air thick with the crackling of raw power. As quickly as it had arrived, the energy dissipated, leaving the room eerily still once again. The walls stopped pulsing, the lights stabilized, and the static in the air cleared. Dran stood frozen, breathless. "The core is reacting. It's alive. What the hell was that?" Kieran whispered, eyes wide. "We need to leave," Dran said, his voice grim. Now, as they made their way back to the exit, Dran's mind raced with the implications. of what he'd just experienced. The Centurion had come back with something it shouldn't have. Something beyond their understanding. The core was not just a piece of technology. It was a link to something far older, far more dangerous, and now, it was choosing. Dran stood in front of the Centurion's core again, a restless unease gnawing at him. The pulsating alien structure seemed almost aware. It was not just technology, it was alive, and now, he was compelled to touch it again, compelled to understand what it wanted from him. The strange energy of the ship had settled over him like a fog, clouding his thoughts. His fingers brushed against the smooth surface of the core, and in an instant the world around him seemed to dissolve. A sudden pressure, not unlike a wave crashing against the body, swept through him. His eyes widened, and for a moment the world distorted, shifting like ripples across water. Visions. They came at him like fractured pieces of a shattered mirror, chaotic and jagged. He saw Earth burning, cities crumbling, skies choked with smoke. He saw himself standing in the ruins, a figure not quite human anymore. The air was thick with death, and the ground trembled beneath his feet. The vision changed again, a flash of something cold, an alien, a creature beyond recognition, with jagged edges, its form flickering like a broken hologram. It reached out, and with it came a rush of emotions, alien and incomprehensible, fear, desperation, an ancient intelligence far beyond human understanding. Dran stumbled back, the overwhelming weight of the vision crashing into his mind. He gasped for air, his hands trembling, his heart raced as if the visions had drained him of every ounce of energy, leaving only exhaustion in their wake. He tried to focus, tried to shake off the disorienting images. What the hell was that? Coulson's voice broke through, but it sounded muffled, distant. Dran blinked, trying to clear the haze in his mind. He met her eyes. I don't know, he said, his voice rough. It's like the ship, the core. It's showing us things we shouldn't see, things about the future. The walls around them seemed to close in, vibrating with an eerie hum that filled the space. His vision blurred again. This time, it wasn't just flashes. This time, it was alive. The core was communicating with him, its presence pressing against his mind, guiding him, urging him to understand. He could feel it, a pulsating connection, as though the ship was reaching into his very thoughts. Commander, Sergeant Kieran's voice was urgent now, breaking through the fog of Dran's mind. There's something wrong. The ship, it's changing. Dran turned toward the sergeant, his brow furrowing. He felt it too, the distortion in the air, like something was warping the space around them. They weren't just in the Centurion anymore. They were in a place where time itself was bending, twisting. Without warning, a blinding flash of light erupted from the core. Dran barely had time to react as the room trembled. A shockwave blasted through the ship, sending them all stumbling. The walls seemed to warp and ripple, as if reality itself were being twisted. The entire ship groaned under the pressure. Get down, Dran shouted, grabbing Coulson and pulling her toward the ground. The shockwave hit with a force that rattled their bones. The floor beneath them cracked, splintering with unnatural speed, sending debris scattering in every direction. The force didn't just push them, it stretched time itself, pulling them through an intangible haze. The core throbbed, its power surging, as the ship quaked. Dran's head was spinning, his vision blurring as the room contorted around him. He couldn't tell if he was seeing the present, the past, or something else entirely. The very fabric of the ship seemed to be alive, manipulating time, creating these visions, pulling them into a temporal loop. His breath came in short gasps. The lights above flickered violently, casting the room in jagged flashes. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the turbulence ceased. The ship fell silent again. The eerie calm returned. The core was still, but Dran could feel its presence. It was waiting, watching. We're not just dealing with a ship, Dran muttered under his breath, his mind struggling to make sense of the chaotic images that still lingered. This thing is something else. The others were on their feet now, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. What the hell did we just witness? Kieran asked, his voice unsteady. Dran shook his head, struggling to focus. The core, it's showing us the future, but it's not just a warning, it's a message. Message? Coulson asked. What kind of message? It's showing us what's coming, Dran said, his voice firm despite the uncertainty swirling in his mind. Humanity's future is at risk, not from an alien invasion, but from our own potential. The core is trying to teach us something that we don't understand yet. As the team absorbed Dran's words, the air around them seemed to grow heavier. They were all aware now of the magnitude of what they had discovered, but what could they do with this knowledge? What was the core trying to convey? Before they could process further, the ship shuddered again, and another sharp crack of energy sent a wave of pressure across the room. This time, however, it wasn't a simple disturbance. It was a burst, an explosion, but it wasn't of matter. The ship's structure seemed to distort itself, warping as though reality itself were being reconstructed. The crew staggered, but the force of the explosion didn't hurt them. It felt as though the ship, or the core, had intervened, protecting them from harm. The force was absorbed, its energy diffused, as though the ship had calculated the potential damage and stopped it. The power was unsettling. No technology on Earth could replicate that kind of control. That wasn't just an explosion, Coulson said, eyes wide. The core, it absorbed the energy. It stopped it. Dran turned toward her, his expression grim. It's not just alive. It's aware. The ship knows what's happening. It's controlling everything, and it's not showing us the future just to warn us. It's showing us what we need to do. We're being chosen, Kieran whispered. As the weight of Dran's words sank in, Dran nodded slowly. The Centurion isn't just a ship, it's an evolution, and we're a part of it now. The air around them seemed to hum with an invisible pressure, as though the ship was waiting for them to make their next move. But Dran knew one thing for certain. The core's power was beyond anything they had ever encountered. The Centurion had changed, and humanity would either embrace it or perish under its influence. And the message was clear. Time was no longer a linear path. What came next would decide the fate of everything. Dran's fingers hovered over the communicator. The cold weight of the moment pressed against him as the Centurion's core pulsed faintly in the distance, a silent reminder of the power and secrets hidden within this alien ship. He had barely comprehended the extent of what was happening. The core, the crew, everything about this mission was beyond their wildest expectations. But now, he had to face the reality of bringing this discovery back to Earth. Federation Command would need to know. He activated the comms, the harsh, sterile buzz cutting through the silence of the ship. Federation Command, this is Commander Dran Voss. Priority 1. I need to speak with Admiral Palko immediately. There was a brief pause. Then the familiar face of Admiral Palko appeared on the display, a graying, hard-edged officer with deep lines carved from years of commanding the Federation's Deep Space Division. His eyes narrowed, skepticism written in every line of his face. Voss, I didn't expect to hear from you so soon. Are you all right? Palko's voice was measured, but there was a thread of tension there, perhaps from the unknowns of the mission. We've made a discovery, sir, Dran began, trying to steady his voice. The Centurion is not just a ship, it's a living entity, part machine, part organic. The crew is suspended in time, their bodies preserved, but their minds trapped in a loop of visions, all linked to the ship's core. Palko didn't respond immediately. Dran could hear the silence stretching between them, the weight of the words settling in the cold space between them. Palko's face hardened. A loop of visions? Palko repeated slowly, as if testing the idea in his mind. Voss, I want you to confirm what you've just said. Your message is disturbing. Are you suggesting the Centurion has been altered? And you're saying the crew is still alive? Alive, yes. But not as we know it. They're not dead, but they're not living in any way we understand. The core, it's manipulating time and space itself, warping reality. It's absorbing technology and knowledge from something far older than humanity, something alien. Dran's words felt heavy in his chest, but he couldn't stop. The truth was too important. I believe the core's influence is not just passive, it's active. It's choosing us. For a long moment, Palko didn't speak. Dran could almost see the gears turning in the Admiral's mind. The silence stretched, suffocating before Palko finally responded. Commander, I'm ordering you to abandon the Centurion. Return with the data you've gathered. We will send a proper containment team. No one gets close to that ship until we understand what we're dealing with. Dran's heart sank. Sir, I can't do that. You don't understand what we've uncovered here. It could change everything. The Centurion isn't just a relic from the past. It's a glimpse into our future. This core, This ship, it's trying to show us what's coming, and I believe it's showing us the key to surviving it. I don't care what you believe, Polko snapped. Get back to the Lancer, Voss. Now, I'll have a fleet standing by to escort you back. We can't risk this becoming something bigger than it already is. Dran's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a mission anymore. This was the Federation's future at stake. The urgency of it weighed down on him. The core, the frozen crew, the strange visions he had to learn more. And he knew, deep in his gut, that the core had chosen him for something far greater. With all due respect, sir, I can't leave until I know everything I need to know. Dran's voice hardened. I will not abandon this mission. Humanity needs to understand what the Centurion is, what it has to offer us. You have to trust me on this. There was a tense silence on the comm. For a long moment, Polko said nothing. When he finally spoke again, his voice was cold. Your mission parameters have changed. Return to the Lancer immediately. I'll have a task force meet you at the coordinates. If you refuse to comply, I'll report you as insubordinate. Do not test me, Voss. Dran stood still, the cold weight of the Admiral's words settling on his shoulders. The comms clicked off abruptly, and Dran was left in the dim light of the Centurion, the low hum of the ship's core almost mocking him. You're not getting away with this, he muttered under his breath, the words sharp like a promise. As the comms died, the crew filed in around him, their faces painted with uncertainty. Coulson's expression was wary, her eyes searching Dran for answers he didn't have. Commander, what now? She asked, her voice low. We move forward, Dran said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. Polko's orders are clear, but they're based on fear, not understanding. This core, it's more than just alien tech, it's our future. And if we leave now, we may never understand what's really at stake. I've never seen you like this, Voss, Kieran added, his voice edged with concern. You're pushing this too hard. The Federation wants to secure it, not explore it. I don't have a choice, Dran replied, his voice tight. You don't understand what I saw. The future. It's not some external enemy, it's us. This core isn't just a warning. It's showing us what we're capable of, for better or worse. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken thoughts. The crew exchanged glances, but no one spoke. They had followed Dran into deep space, into unknown territories, and now they were faced with a decision that could either save or doom humanity. Meanwhile, on the Federation side, the order for a task force was already in motion. Ships were mobilizing, their engines roaring to life in the heart of Earth's command centers. The Federation was gearing up for something that would be nothing short of war, but not the kind they had ever imagined. Dran's instincts were right. Something was changing. The Centurion wasn't just a ship. It was a revelation, one that would push humanity into an era of evolution or destruction. As Dran and his crew prepared to move deeper into the Centurion, something shifted. The first subtle changes began to creep into their bodies, slight, unnoticeable at first. Kieran stumbled, his eyes momentarily glazed over as if lost in thought. Coulson blinked, as if waking from a dream, her fingers twitching unnaturally. Something's wrong, she said, voice cracking. Dran turned sharply to her. What do you mean? I don't know. It's like something is moving inside me. She looked down at her hands, fingers curling and uncurling in an unsettling rhythm. The core, it's doing something to us. Dran froze, feeling a prickling on the back of his neck. He glanced at Kieran, who seemed equally affected, his eyes now wide with confusion. We need to understand what this is before it consumes us. And with that, the Centurion began to change them. They were no longer just its passengers. They were becoming part of its strange evolution. Dran's mind spun, caught between two impossible paths. The power of the core thrummed at his fingertips, filling the room with an almost physical presence. He had felt it since the moment he touched it. The potential of humanity's future, limitless and terrifying. The Centurion's core wasn't just a tool, it was a force, a catalyst that could reshape human existence. But with that power came a question that gnawed at his conscience. Should humanity embrace it? Commander Coulson's voice cut through the air, grounding him back in the present. She stood in front of him, her posture rigid but her eyes betraying a flicker of doubt. What are we doing here? The core, it's changing us. What's next? Dran turned to face her, his breath shallow. He could feel the changes now, the surge of new understanding that coursed through his mind. The flicker of images, and thoughts from the core. Alien tech, forgotten histories, alien architectures, ideas that were impossibly advanced. His body felt different too, stronger, quicker, as though he had been restructured at a cellular level. He wasn't sure if he was still fully human, or if something else had begun to take root in him. "I don't know, Coulson," he replied, his voice strained. "I thought I understood what we were up against. But this core isn't just an alien artifact. It's a piece of something that's been waiting for us to find it. It's trying to show us something." A faint rumble sounded beneath their feet, and the ship trembled again, subtle, but persistent. The core seemed to pulse with an urgent rhythm, almost in sync with the crew's own breathing. Dran felt the weight of every moment, pressing in on him. The Federation had warned him, had ordered him back, but now he knew that the Centurion wasn't something to be contained. It was the key to humanity's future, for better or worse. He could feel it in his bones. Coulson stepped closer, lowering her voice. "What if they're right? What if the Federation's afraid of what's happening here? What if we're becoming something we can't control?" Dran's eyes flashed with an emotion he could barely contain. He reached out for the control panel beside him, his hand brushing against the laser plasma display. The information flickered, showing graphs and equations, alien symbols that made his head spin. But beyond the cold data, the core's influence continued to gnaw at him. "What if we don't control it?" Dran muttered. "What if we learn to live with it? Humanity's always been unpredictable, Coulson, but we've created art, we've pushed boundaries, and we've thrived on chaos. What if this is just another step? What if this is the next stage in our evolution?" "You're talking about trusting the core," she said, her voice low. "Trusting something we don't even understand. We don't have a choice," he replied, a harsh edge creeping into his words. "The Centurion is connected to us now. We can't turn back." As the core's influence continued to settle over him, Dran felt himself torn between fear and the pull of something greater. He could feel the temptation in every fiber of his being, the need to unlock more, to understand what the core could do for humanity. The power it offered could make them rulers of the stars, could give humanity the power to reshape the very fabric of reality. He could feel his mind expanding, possibilities multiplying by the second. But what did it mean? What would they become if they embraced? A sharp tone cut through his thoughts. His comms activated, and Admiral Palco's voice came through, cold and commanding as always. "Voss, I'm ordering a full assault on the Centurion. Your mission has been compromised. Return immediately. We'll send a containment team. You've had enough time. Now it's over." The words hit him like a physical blow. His grip tightened on the control panel, his pulse quickening. The Federation wanted to shut this down. The mission was no longer about exploration. It was about control. "They don't understand," Dran muttered, eyes locked on the display. "The Federation wants to contain it. They don't see the bigger picture. I think we're the ones who don't understand," Coulson replied quietly, her voice filled with doubt. "What happens if we unlock all of this? What if we lose ourselves in the process?" Dran's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the control, opening a comm channel. "Federation Command. This is Commander Dran Voss. I am refusing the order to abandon the Centurion. The core is not a weapon to be contained. It is humanity's future. I will not stand down." His words echoed in the silence of the room. The reality of the decision hit him fully. The Federation would never allow this to go unchecked. He was making a choice, one that could tear everything apart. Without warning, the ship jolted again. This time it wasn't a tremor. It was a force, something far more deliberate. The lights flickered. The ship seemed to buckle under a new weight, the very space around them distorting. "Commander," Kieran's voice was strained. "We're not alone anymore." Dran's heart dropped. On the radar, Federation ships were closing in fast, their trajectories on a collision course with the Centurion. They'd come to enforce the orders Palco had issued to shut them down. "Shields up. Get to the weapons bay. Prepare for impact," Dran barked. But even as he said the words, he knew it wasn't about defense anymore. This wasn't about survival. This was about something more profound. Dran turned back to the core. The power within it surged, reaching out to him, pulling at him like a magnetic force. The ship was alive, and it was offering him the final choice. The Federation might have the fleet, but the Centurion had the future. The core pulsed again, more forcefully this time. The lights dimmed, the air growing heavier with each passing second. Dran could feel the power radiating from it, could feel himself being drawn further into its orbit. The decision wasn't just about the Centurion anymore. It was about humanity. Dran Coulson said, her voice steady but filled with concern. We can't fight them. The Federation will destroy us if we try. We don't have a choice, Dran whispered, more to himself than to her. We're part of this now. This power, it's what comes next. It's what we're meant to become. His hand hovered over the activation button. His heart raced, sweat beading on his forehead. If he opened the core's full power, everything would change. Humanity would change. He could see the possibilities. A new world, a new way of life. But he could also see the risk, the danger of becoming something they couldn't control. He took a deep breath. The Federation was coming for them. He couldn't stop them, not without the core's power. He had no choice but to embrace it. Prepare the crew, he said, his voice grim. We either step into the future, or we fall into the past. Let's make sure humanity survives. The decision was made. The core's power surged through him like a wave. Dran felt his body hum with energy, his mind expanding in ways he never thought possible. The future was at his fingertips. As the first Federation ships closed in, Dran reached out, activating the core. Time bent. Reality shifted. The Centurion was no longer just a ship. It was a force, a weapon of unimaginable power. The battle had just begun. The blaring alarm ripped through the Centurion's corridors, a shrill warning that sent a sharp jolt of adrenaline through Dran's veins. The Federation fleet was here. The time for hiding in the shadows had passed. Outside the hull, the first ships from the Federation's Deep Space Task Force emerged from the black void, their angular forms cut through the darkness, their engines flaring with blue and crimson light as they prepared for their assault. We've got incoming, Coulson's voice echoed through Dran's earpiece, a harsh contrast to the calm of the Centurion's interior. Fleets in range too many for us to handle head-on. Dran didn't respond right away. His eyes scanned the heads-up display as the enemy fleet grew closer, its outline sharpening in the dark. The Centurion was still orbiting at the edge of known space, a position that had once seemed advantageous, but now felt like a trap. The Federation ships were closing in at high velocity, each one carrying the weight of an undeniable mandate: containment, at all costs. They had orders, but the Centurion had something else, something far more dangerous. We don't engage directly, Dran muttered under his breath, more to himself than to anyone else. We need to hit them where it hurts. Orders from Federation High Command are clear. Kieran's voice crackled through. They won't be satisfied until we're neutralized. They don't get it. Dran's voice was quieter this time, almost mournful. This ship isn't just a threat. It's the future. A low growl echoed through the ship, not from engines but from the heart of the Centurion. The core pulsed, a steady rhythmic beat that reverberated through the hull. Dran could feel it deep within his chest, a physical sensation that mimicked a heartbeat, but felt far more unnatural. What's happening? Coulson asked sharply. The floor beneath them shifted, the metal groaning as if reacting to the mounting pressure. The core's doing something, Dran replied. His eyes widened as the Centurion's laser plasma displays began to flicker erratically. Data streams scrambled and then stabilized with eerie rapidity. It's responding to their proximity. The first wave of Federation ships entered the strike zone, a massive dreadnought, its silhouette looming like a silent predator, locked its targeting systems onto the Centurion. But the core was already aware of its presence. Without warning, space itself seemed to tremble, the fabric of reality warping invisible ripples. A small rift opened in the very fabric of space, distorting light, distorting time itself. The Federation ship faltered, its trajectory suddenly veering off course, as its weapon systems shorted out, disabling themselves before they could fire. What the hell just happened? Kieran exclaimed, his eyes wide as the screens blinked to life with error report. The core is manipulating the battlefield, Dran said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's bending the laws of space-time. The Federation fleet quickly regrouped, recalculating their approach. But the Centurion wasn't done. The ship's core pulsed again, more intensely this time, creating another distortion. The fabric of space between the Centurion and the incoming Federation ships flickered and twisted. A sleek destroyer found itself frozen mid-flight as the laws of gravity began to warp around it. The ship's hull groaned as it was caught in a localized gravitational anomaly. Unable to move, its systems scrambled, desperately trying to compensate for the sudden alteration in physics. Dran could almost feel the core's presence as it flowed through the ship, its power growing. It was as though the core had become an extension of his own thoughts, a deep current of possibility that he could feel pulsing in the back of his mind. "Commander, the Federation fleet is destabilizing," Coulson said, her voice tense. "They're being torn apart by their own weapons systems are failing. What do we do now?" For a moment, Dran hesitated, torn between the temptation to use the core's power and the need to protect his crew. But there was no longer any question. The Centurion was now a living entity, one that could bend time, space, and even the mind. "We fight," Dran said, his voice unwavering. "We use their confusion to our advantage, but we need to strike strategically. The core is giving us the edge." He quickly turned to Kieran and the rest of the team, his expression hardening. "Initiate the attack sequence. We're not just going to defend. We're going to disrupt their tactics." Kieran nodded, and the crew moved with purpose, adjusting the Centurion's weapon systems to take full advantage of the core's manipulation. Dran's eyes locked on the laser plasma display, where the Federation fleet now appeared to be splintering into multiple vectors. Each Federation ship was now struggling with the effects of the Centurion's gravitational and spatial warping. Weapon systems malfunctioned, and entire ships veered off course, their lasers missing their intended targets by vast margins. Yet the Federation's resolve remained. They sent in their reinforcements, heavy cruisers prepared to retaliate. But Dran wasn't about to let them take control. "We need to exploit their weakness," Dran said. His mind raced as the Centurion adjusted to the Federation's movement. He studied the incoming ships, calculating each possible response, each potential strike. He pointed to the display. "There. We'll use their momentum against them. We'll collapse the space around their lead cruiser, divert its trajectory into a collision course with their own fleet. We'll make them fight each other." The plan was set into motion. The Centurion's weapon systems powered up as the crew activated the core's hidden capabilities, manipulating the very fabric of reality. The ship's energy pulse surged, sending ripples of spatial distortion cascading through the space around them. As the Federation fleet approached, Dran's finger hovered over the activation button. The core hummed louder, vibrating with energy, ready to tear through the battlefield. The Federation ships were now caught in a web of temporal disarray, their engines faltering, their weapon systems failing. Dran pressed the button. Space itself twisted. The lead cruiser of the Federation fleet collided with its own formation. The ships, caught in the gravitational web of the Centurion, slammed into each other with an almost primal violence, shattering into fiery fragments. The field of destruction rippled outward, as Dran watched the Federation's once imposing forces disintegrate before his eyes. The battle had turned in an instant, but as the last remnants of the Federation fleet struggled, the core pulsed one final time, sending out a wave that echoed across the battlefield. Dran felt the ship shift under his feet, the air thick with the promise of something more. And as the Centurion's influence spread, something shifted in Dran. He understood that the core had become more than just a tool. It was an extension of himself, and with it, humanity could become something more than ever before. But at what cost? The Federation was not done yet. They had one final card to play. The Centurion shuddered with a deep, unsettling vibration. The room was quiet, save for the distant hum of the core, its constant thrum now feeling like a warning. Dran could feel the intensity building within the ship's heart, a pulse that seemed to be reaching outward, alive, aware, and waiting. "Commander," Coulson's voice crackled over the comms, breaking the silence. "We've detected another fleet, much larger this time." Dran's fingers tightened on the control panel as he reviewed the display. A fleet, yes, but not the Federation's. This was something far more dangerous. "Coordinates?" Dran asked, his voice steady but his mind already racing ahead. "Beyond the Oort cloud, sir. Ships entering real space now. They're not using conventional methods. These ships, they're bending light, bending space itself." "Damn," Dran muttered. He turned away from the screen, eyes narrowing. This isn't just another alien warship. This is something much worse. He could feel the weight of the situation pushing down on him, the gravity of what was happening now more real than ever before. The Federation had dealt with pirate fleets, with rogue factions. But this was different. "They've been watching us," Dran said to no one in particular, his words low. "They've always been watching. The cores, it's not just a warning, it's a trigger." A sharp ping erupted from the laser plasma display. The signal was growing clearer now, the unmistakable trajectory of an invasion fleet, carving through the fabric of space. Dron's mind snapped back into focus as the coordinates flashed across the screen. The fleet was moving with terrifying precision, a massive armada with no sign of retreat. Coulson's voice sounded again, more urgent this time. "We've confirmed it, Commander. The ships, these aren't just ships. They're alive, they're biomechanical, and they're heading straight for." The realization hit Dron like a physical blow. These ships weren't just advanced, they were grown, living beings, vessels built from something more ancient than anything humanity had ever encountered. His heart raced as he turned to face his crew, who stood frozen, the weight of the moment sinking in. "Their name," Dron said quietly, but his voice carried through the room. "They're called the Valari Ascendancy." "Valari Ascendancy," Coulson repeated, her voice thick with disbelief. "What does that mean?" "It means we're facing an extinction-level threat, a species that has been watching humanity from the shadows. We thought the Federation was the only power in the galaxy," Dron continued, his voice heavy. "But the Valari, they control everything, and they've decided we're a problem." He glanced at the map once more. The Valari's ships were now pouring into the solar system with brutal efficiency. They're massive ships, each one a grotesque fusion of biological and mechanical elements, hung in the void like massive insect-like creatures, each one capable of warping space itself. "These ships, they don't just fight with weapons," Dron said, running a hand through his hair. "They reshape reality. The core, the power we've been tapping into, it's the only thing that can match their capabilities." Dron's mind raced as the ship's core pulsed in response to the mounting threat. He could feel it, an overwhelming surge of power, as if the ship itself was preparing for something. The core wasn't just responding to the Valari's arrival, it was preparing humanity to fight back. "We need a plan," Kieran said, stepping up to the console. "If they have this kind of power, there's no way we can fight them with conventional methods." "No," Dron replied, his eyes flashing, "but we don't need conventional methods. We have the core. We can use it, reshape the battlefield." He paused, considering the terrifying reality that lay ahead. The Valari were far older than humanity, their civilization steeped in a knowledge that humanity could never hope to understand. But the Centurion, through its absorption of alien technology, had given Dron an advantage he could no longer ignore. "We're not going to sit here and wait for them to wipe us out," he continued, his voice now hardened with resolve. "The Centurion isn't just a ship, it's humanity's last chance. If we can control it, we can control the battlefield." He turned to Coulson and Kieran, his gaze unwavering. "We'll start by using the core's manipulation of time and space to disrupt their approach. We'll create localized black holes in their path, concentrating gravitational anomalies to slow them down. We have to hit them where it hurts, their command structures." The plan was dangerous, and every part of it carried risks that Dron couldn't afford to ignore, but they had no choice. The Valari were not just invaders, they were gods in the making, and if humanity didn't rise to the challenge, they would be erased without a trace. As Dron prepared to initiate the first phase of the plan, the sensors on the Centurion flashed a new warning. The Valari had launched their first strike. It was instantaneous, a ripple through space, an overwhelming burst of energy that fractured the very laws of physics. "Brace yourselves," Kieran yelled, as the Centurion rocked violently. The walls trembled, and the ship groaned as reality itself twisted. In the distance, the Valari fleet had fired, unleashing a devastating weapon that bent time in ways Dron couldn't fully comprehend. The Centurion's shields flickered and faltered under the assault. The ground beneath them rippled, as if the ship itself were being pulled apart. "Status," Dron barked. "Shields at 20%. Coulson's voice cracked through the chaos. "We can't hold much longer." But as the Valari's attack continued, Dron felt the core. It pulsed, responding to the energy that flooded through the ship. The gravitational waves intensified, warping space even more violently. Then, with an almost exultant surge, the core released. The Centurion's systems lit up with an explosive power, and reality itself bent to its will. The Valari's attack froze mid-air, their weapons disintegrating in a cascade of light. The Federation's forces watched in stunned silence, as the enemy fleet shuddered and splintered under the force of the Centurion's influence. Dron stared at the unfolding chaos, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. The Valari were not just an enemy, they were the gods of an ancient order, and they had underestimated the power of humanity. The battle for the galaxy had just begun. The final confrontation was unfolding. Dran stood at the heart of the Centurion, his mind racing but his face unreadable. The battle outside the ship had escalated into a chaotic storm of warping reality. The Valier ascendancy, for all their ancient power, had underestimated humanity's will. The Federation had never faced anything like this. Nothing capable of bending the very fabric of existence to its whims. In the command center, the atmosphere was electric, charged with anticipation. The core's influence was stronger now, flowing through every inch of the Centurion, its tendrils reaching deep into the ship's systems. Dran could feel it as if the ship was part of him, as though he had become an extension of its will. "Commander, the Vailari are regrouping." Coulson's voice broke through the thick air of concentration. She stood beside the laser plasma display, watching the Federation fleet and the Vailari forces clash with devastating ferocity. "They're not backing down." Dran's gaze shifted to the display. The Vailari ships moved with terrifying precision, their forms like massive, alien creatures gliding through the battlefield. Each ship had the ability to warp space-time around it, making it nearly impossible to target them with conventional weapons. The Federation's ships were struggling to keep up, their laser cannons ineffective against the sheer gravity-defying power of the Vailari fleet. The Centurion was humanity's only hope, and Dran knew it. "We don't need conventional weapons," Dran said, his voice low but firm. "We have something far more powerful at our disposal." He turned toward the core's control console, his eyes narrowing. "The core can bend space-time more effectively than anything the Vailari have. We're going to use it against them." The plan was. Dran activated the core, sending pulses of energy through the ship. The Centurion responded, its hull shimmering as the ship tapped into the deep, almost unfathomable power of the core. He could feel it growing stronger, the surge of energy matching the intensity of the battle outside. "We need to isolate their command ships," Dran muttered, fingers dancing across the console, pulling up schematics of the Vailari fleet. "If we can sever their connection to the fleet, their ships will fall apart." The ship's systems clicked into place. The Centurion's core began to manipulate space around the Vailari fleet, creating localized rifts in space-time. The Vailari ships, already unnerved by the Centurion's strange abilities, began to falter, their weapon systems malfunctioned. Massive gravitational distortions yanked their ships off course, their trajectories erratic and unpredictable. Now Dran whispered to himself, "Let's see how they adapt." Coulson's voice cut through his thoughts. "They're not adapting as fast as we expected. Their command ships, 3 of them, are pulling back. They're trying to regroup." Dran nodded, his mind working quickly. The Vailari had learned to adapt to most threats, but they hadn't encountered anything like the Centurion, a vessel that could manipulate the very fabric of reality. "Let them," Dran said, his voice cold. "They're making a mistake." The Centurion surged forward, a living, breathing entity of war. The core's influence spread outward, pulling apart the fabric of space around the Vailari ship. The air grew thick with tension, and the sense of reality began to shift with each movement of the core. Dran could see the Vailari fleet splintering, their formations collapsing as their ships were dragged into unstable orbits by the Centurion's gravitational manipulation. The Federation ships, though still reeling from the earlier assault, quickly adapted, capitalizing on the chaos the Vailari had caused for themselves. "We've broken their formation," Kieran reported, his voice tight with urgency. "They're scrambling." "Now we strike," Dran said, the words final, his hand reaching for the core's power controls. The core's pulse grew stronger, and Dran could feel the ship shift as the gravitational anomalies began to tear through the battlefield. The Vailari were no longer in control. Just as the Centurion seemed to have gained the upper hand, a new threat appeared on the horizon. Through the plasma displays, a single figure materialized in front of the Centurion, the Vailari leader, towering and ancient, his ship radiating an oppressive aura of power. "I am Kadros." The Vailari leader's voice boomed over the comms, a harsh, unyielding sound that reverberated through the Centurion's systems. His presence was like a weight, a heavy pressure that seemed to push down on every member of the crew. "You dare challenge the ascendancy? Your species is but a fleeting anomaly in the galaxy's design." Dran's eyes locked onto the figure, the feeling of unease growing stronger in his gut. The Centurion had granted them power, but it was clear that the Vailari leader wielded something even more ancient. Kadros wasn't just a military leader, he was an entity that had lived through eons, a god of sorts to his people, and he wasn't going to surrender easily. "We've only just begun," Dran said, his voice unwavering despite the overwhelming force facing them. Humanity will not bow to your will. Kadros let out a low laugh, one that sent a chill through the ship. Your will is irrelevant. The galaxy has no place for creatures like you. Prepare to be erased. The Centurion responded with a violent surge, the core pulsing with energy so strong it sent a shockwave through the ship, rattling the crew. Dran's heart raced as the ship's systems warped around him, the boundaries between reality and the ship blurring. This was it, the final clash, the moment that would decide the fate of humanity. Dran reached for the control panel, activating the core's full power. He could feel the ship shifting under his feet, could feel the battle changing, warping to the Centurion's will. The final confrontation between him and Kadros was imminent. In the distance, the Valari fleet drew closer, and the space between them and the Centurion seemed to bend. The battle for the galaxy was far from over, and Dran could only hope that humanity's defiance would be enough to rewrite their fate. The battle was over, but victory came with a cost. The Centurion hung in orbit above the shattered remnants of the Valari fleet, the remnants of their ships now floating like forgotten debris in the cold of space. The light from the distant sun cast long shadows on the ship's hull, its surface now scarred and cracked, a reflection of the toll the battle had taken. Inside the Centurion, Dran stood alone in the command center, his fingers pressing lightly against the glass console as he gazed at the desolate expanse beyond. The war had ended, but the silence that followed was deafening. The Valari had been defeated, their dominance shattered. Humanity had won, but the cost of that victory was far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Dran's reflection stared back at him from the glass, but it wasn't just his face anymore. The changes that had begun with his connection to the core were now undeniable. His skin, once normal, now shimmered with a faint, unnatural glow. His eyes, once human, now reflected a depth of understanding, an understanding that came with the knowledge of an alien species far older than humanity itself. The Centurion had changed him, integrated him into its very essence. He was no longer fully human, but something different, something new, something unpredictable. The door to the command center opened, and Coulson stepped in. She looked at him with a mixture of concern and awe. "We did it, Dran," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of everything they had just gone through. "The Valari are gone, we're free." Dran turned slowly to face her, his expression unreadable. "Are we?" he asked. His voice was steady, but there was something beneath the calm, something that gnawed at him. "Are we really free?" Coulson raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He gestured to the console where a heads-up display flashed with new readings. Disturbing, yet somehow expected. The readings showed spikes in gravitational anomalies, unexplainable fluctuations in time and deep space energy pulses. The Centurion's core had not just absorbed alien technology, it had become something far beyond even the most advanced human understanding. "We've won the war," Dran said, his voice colder now, his words measured. "But the Centurion, the core, it's given us a power we don't fully understand. And once we've embraced it, we can never go back. Humanity isn't the same anymore." The stars outside seemed distant, fading into the blackness of space. The battle was over, but the questions had just begun. Dran had seen glimpses of what the future could hold, and they weren't the peaceful dreams that humanity had once cherished. The core had revealed a potential for humanity that was beyond comprehension. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about transcendence. "We need to start planning for the future," Dran said, turning from the display to face the crew who had gathered behind him. "The Valari might be gone, but this galaxy, this universe hasn't forgotten us. We've become something they never thought possible." Kieran spoke up from the back of the room, his voice filled with uncertainty. "But at what cost, Commander? The core, it's changing us. Some of the crew, myself included, we're not the same anymore. We've gained knowledge, abilities we never thought possible, but we've lost parts of ourselves in the process." Dran looked at him, the weight of his words sinking in. "I know. I feel it too, but we can't ignore the power we have. If we do, we risk being wiped out again. The Valari might not be the last threat we face. We've seen what happens when we embrace this technology," Coulson said, her voice low but firm. "But we don't know what it will cost us. What if we lose everything that makes us human?" Dran paused, looking out the viewport once more. The Centurion had become their home, their symbol, their legacy, but it was also their prison. The core had given them power, but it was up to them to decide whether that power would be used for good or for destruction. We can never go back, he said softly. But humanity, we must decide what we do with this power. It's our choice now. We either rise or we fall. Dran stood before the console again, his fingers hovering over the activation panel that would open the core's full potential. The ship hummed beneath him, the air thick with anticipation. The crew watched him, their faces a mixture of awe, fear, and hope. They were all changed. The power of the core had integrated them into something more, something greater. But the question remained, should they embrace this evolution, or should they walk away from the abyss they had unlocked? I've seen the future, Dran said, his voice steady, carrying the weight of all their futures. The Valari were right to fear us. We can't just survive anymore. We can create a new era, one where humanity is more than just a species. We could reshape reality itself. But at what cost? Kieran asked again, his voice strained. How do we know we won't lose everything that makes us human in the process? Dran turned toward him, the finality in his gaze, undeniable. Maybe that's the price we have to pay. Maybe we're meant to transcend what we are, evolve beyond our limitations. He activated the core. The ship's entire structure hummed with the force of the power now coursing through it. The Centurion's systems flickered and aligned with the new energy, the very fabric of reality bending under the ship's influence. In that moment, Dran felt it, a surge of knowledge, of energy, a new understanding that opened his mind and heart to the limitless possibilities before them. Humanity had crossed a line, a threshold that could not be uncrossed. The Centurion had become a living symbol of humanity's potential, not just for survival but for growth. The Valari were gone, but they had left humanity with a legacy far more dangerous. The galaxy had watched, and now, it would never be the same again. But Dran knew one thing with absolute certainty. Humanity was ready. The Centurion would no longer be a weapon of fear. It would become a beacon, guiding humanity into the future, no longer shackled by its past, but soaring toward its destiny. The Valari would return one day, but next time, humanity would be ready, not just to survive but to thrive. The final words echoed in Dran's mind as he watched the Centurion sail through the stars. Its mission clear: we are human, and we are limitless.